Hi, everyone. We meet again for the second to the last discussions that we have for this year with regards to, of course, the contemporary world. And this is about global food security. Let me share to you now my presentation for in order for us to begin. Okay, so let's open the file. Okay, so food is the first basic human need and fundamental right of every human being. And of course, this is about global food security. And although this has been a crucial issue, there is always an increasing global concern in it after even the 2008 food crisis. And of course, this presentation explains the concept of food security, its evolution, challenges at country level as well as the global level, and ends with a set of recommendations or conclusions. And that is why the UN, or the United Nations Organization, recognized the right to food in the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, vital for the enjoyment of all other rights. So it's actually an evolving concept. And of course, it's getting refined even after new developments and greater awareness about its necessity. And therefore, it's defined as occurring when all people are able to access enough safe and nutritious food to meet their requirements for a healthy life in ways that, of course, the planet can sustain into the future. And however, food security faces a number of challenges across both production, consumption, and even research, which is also essential to solve. So in many countries, they're facing the double burden of hunger and undernutrition alongside overweight and obesity, with actually 1 in 3 people across the globe currently suffering from some form of malnutrition. And indeed, it is not unusual to find people with different forms of malnutrition living side by side in one country, in one community, or even in the same household. So during the 1970s, I created there was a food crisis, and even in the 80s, first it was of course the availability, and the second was the access, and the third was of course the assumption of food in the 1990s, and during even the 2000 and the 2010, stability and nutrition were added to the component of food security. And now food security means five things. First is, of course, food is available in the country. It is accessible to, of course, its people physically and financially, and people are healthy to absorb the food. And of course, food supplies and prices are stable over a period of time, and the food is nutritious enough to sustain the human body. So when all people at all times, according to the FAO, or the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United States, rather the United Nations, when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active life. So it means this is their response, or this is their mission. And of course, it's this Food and Agriculture Organization is an agency that combats global hunger and, of course, promotes rural development. And the FAO was born in 1945 alongside with the United Nations. And in the first two decades of its existence, the led the role in global food and agricultural issues, overseeing the establishment of important agreements and institutions, and of course, including the very popular World Food Program. And of course, the crisis in the 1970s, however, undermined the organization's reputation. So, in response, the FAO began its decade-long decentralization process, opening country offices and creating a new unit for in-country technical cooperation projects. For, of course, if there is a need that arises for such security measures for food. Now, this is actually a table describing the forecast and even undermined or underdeveloped countries in terms of global food security. So about 1 in 9 people suffer from chronic hunger, and most of them in the developing world. And as many as 1 in 3 people are currently affected by micronutrient deficiency or the so-called hidden hunger. So the hidden hunger, it means that even though you look like you're healthy, but there is micronutrient deficiency that you have. May kulang ka sa nutrients or something like that. Okay, so despite some progress achieving the target of having hunger from the 1990s to 2015, or the levels by 2015, remains uncertain. So indeed, this issue, or the global demand for food, is projected to increase around 70 to 80% by 2050. So, or to 2050, and the issues such as climate change, energy and fuel prices that are going higher and higher, and of course the surging demand for meat, fish, and poultry and eggs, and of course dairy products, and the continued rapid population growth. Combining all of this makes reducing hunger a complex global challenge. Because remember, that's one of the SDGs, right? So despite the substantial progress in, of course, the MDGs when it was launched in the year 2000 to alleviate poverty and hunger, so the number of people chronically undernourished by that time, or even in 20, kind of up until now, the chronically undernourished are more than 870 million, the bulk of which are, of course, in the parts of Africa and Asia. In these continents alone, 15% of the population is undernourished. So remember the demographics that we described in the global citizenship. So that's actually part of this discussion. Okay? And of course, the global food crisis, as described or as reported by, of course, the FAO, the world's 200 wealthiest people have as much as money as about 40% of the global population. And yet, there is still people, or 850 million people, going hungry every night. Okay, that's actually the situation. Now, the lesson learned from these things that were described. So, in a broader perspective, it is the agricultural development which makes the biggest dent in poverty reduction, and hence, there it will follow food and nutrition security. So, this growth, or the growth, must be inclusive, ensuring the participation of the poor. And of course, this effort process for sustainable development or improvement in food security would happen. And this, of course, even the aspects of food security, such as safe drinking water, health services, and food fortification, should also be in place, or should also happen. These are the lessons learned. And of course, despite the highest growth rates which can be achieved, there's always a significant section of society which could not reap the benefits of growth for any reason. Okay. State must also create, therefore, an efficient and transparent system of course, social safety nets for these people who are left in this growth process. So in times of pandemic, emergency or crisis like this, there are social safety nets in place. Like for example, the in our crisis right now, the SAP, or in our country, the social amelioration program that was launched by President Duterte is one of the social safety nets, answering some issues, or important issues regarding food, health, etc., and the others. Okay, tinutuhog niya lahat. Okay, so growth must ultimately be accompanied by social and political structural changes, which, of course, first is the people empowerment, good governance, and of course, the gender balance, and the public-private sector participation in terms of growth. Kasi nga, it's not just basically the government as a whole, but even the way that you balance everything else. So the challenges, or the major security challenges, are the following that was described a while ago. So the production, the consumption, the distribution, and the politics. These are all major players And even, of course, these areas, decrease in cultivated area, degradation of arable lands, and of course, the stagnant yields, which actually, due to less adequate resources allocation for research and development, that's why it has a stagnant yield. Even also climate change and environmental threats are, of course, a challenge to food security. In this way, like for example, what that happened recently for our typhoon releases, the Cagayan region, which actually is where we get our supply of rice, has been affected. So this climate change needs to be addressed in order for again to rebuild the Cagayan area. So the land grabbing by corporate firms in food insecure countries for cultivation of food, grains, and their export to rich countries are also prevalent. That's for production. Now we go to consumption. In the consumption area, there are actually four. So the consumption is first is the population, the increase in population. Of course, number of people are increasing, so the demand of food is increasing. That's how it is. So up and sometimes it's nagaganon siya the scale. Okay, and then of course growing prosperity, more meat items in the domestic menu, which means more food grains. And of course changing food habits, because when urbanization needs more processed food, which consumes more food. And of course, wastages, overeating, so we have food cooked more than the needs, and of course, food getting expired in our refs or in our chain stores. We just throw it away. So these are types of wastages. And of course, the distribution aspect, there are issues also. So the major issues are, of course, access to food, financial constraints, and physical and otherwise financial. This may either be by bad governance, by poverty, inequality, and lack of insufficient jobs, and of course, food denial to people and the communities due to, of course, wars and civil wars and militancy. This is present actually in Africa. So these are all the distribution aspect of food security. So, of course, in the political, there's also these following issues: the poor commitment of the ruling elite. Of course, the legislation should come in hand with, of course, the measures that they have to undergo in terms of the issue of food security, and not providing good governance, and of course, not improving overall law and order in terms of security situation, for peaceful movement of the goods or the food grains that can be available to anyone, and of course not making special arrangements for the provision of food grains in conflict or disaster prone areas. I think my example last time or just a few minutes ago with regards to Cagayan is that's one of the main making special arrangements. So you have to be quick to decide on the provision of food grains to these disaster prone areas, because farmers lost their jobs there and they lost their land to till. Diba? So that's how it is in Cagayan. Now, the responses of each country. It should be, according to the United Nations, the country responses are supposed to be the following. So in food availability, there should be an increase in production through horizontal and vertical expansion. These horizontal expansions are, of course, you have to increase the technological interventions. There should be greater water availability and using it efficiently. Even your farm to road markets should be improved. And of course, production through vertical expansion pertains to good agricultural practices, availability of quality inputs at affordable prices. Even your seedlings are very important, even the grains, the prices and the structuring should also be taken into consideration. And of course, more reliance on intercropping and agroforestry. And of course, the reduce the production and post-production losses of sometimes in the facilities. Of course, you have to establish food go downs, and you respond to the needs of the vulnerable groups when needed. And of course, you establish an adequate system to forecast these shortages if ever it happens, and timely import food grains. If, for example, yung food grains natin or the stored food grains were washed away, what will be our timely response? And the food, of course, the food access, we have to improve the physical and financial access of food to, of course, free movement of food grains throughout the country. And of course, in the financial aspect, of course, the job creation or employment skill and skills development. Okay, that's the financial aspect so that they could buy the food that they need to be healthy. And of course, provide income support to those who are extremely poor, and providing, of course, the social safety nets. You have to provide income or support to them. Okay, so ang daming foods because that's the produce of course, farmers. Now, in terms of absorption, these are the following. So you have to have improved healthcare. You have to provide and promote preventive healthcare, which is more cost efficient and of course curative than of course curative and measurable in terms of course improving the healthcare of everyone else, not just of course those who can afford. And then of course population planning, that's part of the food absorption. You have to of course respond to mother and child healthcare, and of course, population planning is one also part of that to address its rapid growth with particular attention to, of course, mother and child. Even their health care is needed. And of course, waterborne diseases are widespread. So we have to have special attention to that in some cases because of the rise in cholera also. And of course, food fortification to make healthy and absorption friendly for to become nutritious the foods that the food grains that we import or we buy. And of course, in terms of the stability, there should be buffer stocks for each country for easy access or easily available in emergency situations. And of course, the code of conduct of the of the United Nations Organization should be restricted to, of course, exports of food by food exporting countries in times of crisis, and of course, sometimes aggravated situations, and of course, the actual crisis itself. And of course, the timely information of trends in stocks, and of course, the production, looming food shortages. Should have the research or the information on who do you need to address first or give priority to in terms of shortages. And of course, the timely import of food grains when necessary. If there is a fall below the threshold of your stocks in the region, so there should be an in-time import of food grains. Now, the global response. The global response in the year 2008 witnessed a dramatic increase in food prices. The global financial crisis that began in 2008 compounded actually the burden of high food prices and exacerbates the problems of hunger and malnutrition in developing countries. So the tandem of food price and economic crisis actually struck the amidst the massive and chronic problems of hunger and undernutrition, and of course in developing countries, this is prevalent. National governments and international actors have taken a variety of steps to mitigate the negative effects of increased food prices on particular groups. The recent abrupt increase in food prices in tandem with the current global economic crisis threatens progress already made in these areas and could inhibit future efforts. So there should be a renewed commitment at the global and state level for, of course, reducing poverty. And of course, all countries must allocate resources for agricultural R&D or research and development to share these findings with in the private level, the institution, and of course in research in general. And of course, the collaboration should be necessary for healthcare reforms to improve the absorption and nutrition of our body. And of course, they have to put in place an efficient and reliable forecasting system or early warning systems for specifically for the grains production and stocks position. And of course, even in global warming and environment sustainability and even climate change should also be essential in, of course, dealing with food security. And of course, the buffer stocks, the regional buffer stocks, should, of course, be a response to emerging threats of food shortages. Okay, so there's this big creation of regional stocks, not just basically a central area wherein what happened like to Cagayan. So some of the stocks there weren't able to dinadala pa lang yan sa different parts of the Philippines. Pero yun nga, hindi na nakarating kasi nga because binaha or whatever, nasira yung rice or yung bigas. So then of course, you defies fair rules of the game for the trading of these food grains and of course the equitable sharing the increase of the global trade for this one, for the food grains and other development matters in terms of food consumption and production also, even in the materials or the machines needed. And of course, a ban on cultivation of crops for biofuels is also essential for food production. Kasi nga, when you have biofuels, you cannot be able to till the land anymore to plant if ever rice or crops. You can plant crops there anymore. Okay, the conclusion for this basically, or the recommendation is enough food for active living, and the growth can raise incomes and reduce hunger, and broad-based growth can reduce hunger and poverty. And of course, growth policies must aim at enhancing, of course, agricultural productivity and targeting, of course, the poorest of the poor, especially in the rural areas. So these are the things that are in place for food security. These are the conclusions that were derived by, of course, the United Nations and, of course, even all of the discussions. This is actually even the conclusion for the food and agricultural office. Okay, so that ends actually the discussion. So please wait for the guide questions that we will be discussing on our next meeting. So see you then. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.